When you're speaking, here is probably the best place to stand.
Yeah, I think when it's questions, we'll go into the slides. But right now, stay out of the way. So it won't be easy.
Unless they're
That's all right, don't worry.
this range.
Can the camera move while we're doing it? Is that with the G?
It can.
Like, could you just pan this way?
Pretty good, thank you. And you?
Incognito.
That's what. Oh, sorry.
You're allowed to be. See? You're allowed to. Fine.
Sure, yeah, that works.
And can you tell them all about it?
Don't need to use them. I think we just won't use them when we speak loud. If they speak softly, I'll give them a nudge and tell them to stop.
So these guys sit down.
Yeah, good to go.
Good evening, everybody. I have to read from a speech because it's not that long, but I mustn't forget anything, so excuse that. Thank you all for joining us tonight and hear about the proposals from Mayday Saxonvale grant application. I'm Steve Tanner. I'll be sharing this evening's meeting. So you're aware this meeting is being recorded and live streamed as we speak. We want to make our meetings available to as many people as possible, regardless of where they are. So we're using our hybrid setup, people here in the town hall and online via Zoom. For those of you in the room, a little housekeeping, the emergency exit is the rear door to the right there. The assembly point is in the car park. Toilets can be accessed right at the end of the corridor on the right-hand side. And there is an accessible toilet to the right of it. It's great to see so many people interested in the proposals. Our aim this evening is to make sure that people are informed about the proposals, have an opportunity to ask Mayday Saxonvale team questions, and for Frimtown Council to hear those comments so we can take them into account as part of the council's formal response to the application. For those online, we're sorry we've not been able to accommodate more people here in person, obvious reasons. Unfortunately, none of the larger venues in town are also available. However, we do have, I understand, over 100 people registered to join us on Zoom, which is very good. After the presentation from Paul and the team here, there will be an opportunity for questions for those in the room. Just raise your hands. And for those on Zoom, please type your questions into the Q&A box and we will take a selection as we go along. Jane will monitor the questions and you will be unmuted and invited to speak when we get to your question. Obviously, it doesn't apply to people in the room. We aim to finish the meeting around 8:30, plus or minus. If there are any unanswered questions remaining, we'll capture these with the team here, send them to the presentation team, and they will be answered and they'll be published as we go. That's it. At that, I'm going to hand over to Paul.
Great.
Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. So thanks everyone for coming and those that are joining online. We're beyond excited to share with you our plans for Saxonvale. And we'll start by... Great start.
It was working.
It was. There we are. So I thought we'd start by kind of just introducing the team that are presenting and the wider team that are behind the proposal. So I think everyone can see over here. So first of all, to introduce the Mayday Saxonvale team. You might be wondering who this weird bunch of people are. So we've got Damon Moore, put your hand up, so I can see you. Kate Moore, Holly Lawton, Katie Butcher, and Chloe Jones, and myself, Paul Oster. And then the team from Stories, our development partner. We've got Richard Mear, Paul Clark, and James Scott. And then our architecture team, crucial, Andrew Kirby from Andrew Kirby Architects. And then we've got Johnny Buckland from Studios R, who lives and is based his practice in Frome. And the same applies to Simon Brown from Land Story, our landscape architect, also based in Frome. So, there we are. So first of all, to talk a bit about Mayday Saxonvale, who are we? So we were established earlier in the year as a not-for-profit social enterprise, a company limited by guarantee. And we gave quite a bit of thought as to how we incorporated ourselves and structured ourselves as a company in that way, so that it locks in that there are no shareholders, there's no way for us to distribute profits that might accrue within the company. Any profits that did accrue would have to be used for the aims of the company. So we think that's really important. Trust is important, but where we can put rules in place to enforce behaviours, the right behaviours, then we always want to do so. And our sole objective is to acquire and develop that site there, Saxonvale, for the benefit of the community of Frome. We're in it for the long term, so we all are off Frome, live in Frome, and we're here for the long term. So unlike maybe a traditional developer that develops, moves to the next site, we're here for the long term. And hopefully that, again, should engender some trust in terms of how we're going to behave in the future. And ultimately, what we want to do is provide a different model of development with our partners' Stories, which really starts to put communities in the driving seat. So that when we're delivering these kind of developments within a town, where our interests are aligned in delivering what the community needs. And not that the community has to continuously try and hold the developer to their promises and ask them to do the things that the community needs. We're going to go through all the detail of the plan as we go, but I thought it might be worth just starting with our kind of overall vision for Saxonvale. And what we try to do is look at what does the community need, what does the community value, what's the spirit of the town, and develop a plan that is aligned with those things. And first of all, this is, the Saxonvale is the historic industrial centre of Frome. It is an employment site. And a lot of the previous employment sites in Frome have been lost to housing. This is the last town centre site and an employment site. So for us, it's absolutely crucial that it becomes a true town centre extension that puts employment absolutely at its heart. Affordable housing above the policy requirement. We're not going to try and game the affordable housing below the limit and just try and push it down. If anything, we'd rather increase it beyond what we've set out at the current status and aspiration. We want to deliver distinctive residential neighbourhoods which have a community-centric design, so they're communities within a community, and that they're distinctive, some of them reflecting the existing structures within Frome and others of their own right. Preserving historic structures and buildings and community assets. We'll talk about some of these other things as we go along. But I'll now hand over to Richard from Stories, who can tell you a bit about Stories and the delivery model.
Thank you.
That's the
Lovely, thank you. Yes, good evening, everyone. So I'm Richard from Stories. I have a confession, I'm not from Frome, I'm not a Frome resident, but I am from Corsham, so I'm about half an hour away or so. So, and I frequent this town quite often with my family, so it's great to be supporting colleagues and team members here as well today. So just to give you a little bit of background on Stories, Stories, what is Stories? Stories is a socially responsible property developer. And what we do is we go about delivering mixed-use developments around the country where there's a real focus on outcomes for people and for planet too. So to give a little bit of more context to this, we set up Stories, we founded Stories a few years ago on the basis of having a real focus on outcomes and saying, you know, how, when we do something in the world of development, can we think about whatever we do having a really positive impact for the people who live in and around the area we're working, and also the environment associated with it. And how can we use our development skills to actually create those outcomes rather than the other way around of like, let's do a big financial deal and then let's say there's going to be some nice things in order to make the thing work. So it's always come from that lens, and that's what we've set about doing. And just to give you a little bit of context around that, about what we're doing at the moment, we're working with lots of interesting organisations. So, for example, we're working on a project with St Mungo's Homeless Charity at the moment in Westminster, in London, and we're creating an amazing new state-of-the-art facility for their clients, for tackling rough sleeping in Westminster. And what we've gone about doing is setting up a model that is all about tackling that rough sleeping challenge in Westminster. And to do that, we're actually delivering homes alongside it, some of which are affordable as well, to pay for that new facility, but it's all driven from the outcomes that we're looking to achieve there. We're also working with others like the Crown Estate, who have a really good purpose around lasting prosperity for the nation, and also Nottingham City Council, where we've got 20 acres of effectively semi-derelict shopping centre, the Broadmarsh shopping centre right in the middle of Nottingham, and we've been working on them to sort of develop a model around a whole kind of outcomes-based appraisal for what will go there. So not just thinking about what's going to give the highest land value and this and that, but actually thinking about what's going to generate the most for the city. So in terms of whether, tackling the particular challenges of that city, whether it's around retaining graduates or whether it's around tackling housing challenges and so on as well. So that's what we go about doing, and we do it on the basis of some of these principles that you can see on the left-hand side of us here. And I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but I would note that the top one is key to us. It's around partnership and trust and being open and transparent, and that's how we work. And we continue to work in the projects we're doing. Just by way of giving a little bit of background, I just thought I'd refer to the image as well here. Some of you might be aware that this is King's Cross. So this is up in King's Cross in London. This is actually Central St Martin's College of Art and Design, well-known arts college, university, Granary Square in the foreground, all behind King's Cross train station. And just to give a bit of context, this is the background. This is where I come from originally. So I spent 15 years and I delivered this project, and it's got hopefully quite a good reputation in terms of trying to do good things and being well known for what it does. I wouldn't say it's probably the number one for community-led development. So it's really interesting in terms of working here today and working with colleagues here on something which really does have that focus. But certainly in terms of the quality of what's been done there, hopefully if any of you had a chance to go and see it, you'll see that it's done a good thing and made a positive contribution in the round to the area. Stories itself is also a sort of pending B Corp, and a B Corp is something where you go and change your articles of association of your company, and you say, I'm actually going to be looking at triple bottom line returns, so I'm going to be looking at the economic, social and environmental returns, and you change your articles of your association to do that, but you don't just put it away in a filing cabinet. You then actually have to hold yourself to account, and you're audited every year to do that. So that's try to ingrain that within our business. And so in this process, we've been supporting the Mayday Saxonvale team, and we've been really pleased to work with them and to help them evolve the scheme, which they have been all leading. But we're very content that what you see this evening does work. It is robust, and there's been a great deal of thought that's gone into it. And we're confident that it can, financially work and deliver the outcomes that will be talked about this evening as well. So if I just go on to, I've got one more slide for you. So what would Stories actually do in this process? So there's really probably two things that we'd be focusing on. One is around the financial side of things. So we're saying, we would form a joint venture with Mayday Saxonvale. The two things we would do. One is about arranging finance and the right type of funding and support for this project. And what is critical is to have the right type of money for this project that can take the right view, that has an interest in the social and environmental outcomes that come from that too. And it's very much a case of arranging, we've got all sorts of different relationships with different sorts of institutional monies and so on, but it's about arranging the right bit of money for the right project. It's not just sort of sitting on a pot of cash, which then is burning a hole in your pocket, and you've got to go and do something, and then you might make the wrong decisions. So that's one of the things we do. That's helping to bring together the finance. And then secondly, we will be working on the development management. So we're just helping with bringing the experience that we have of actually delivering different mixed-use projects, whether it's the infrastructure and the buildings and so on, and supporting the team on that to make sure it works well in the long term. And just a little bit more on that financial approach, just to give you a little bit more context to it. The key thing for us is actually trying to, with all these projects, you have to obviously inject money into it, and that money has a cost inevitably because there's a risk associated with it, and you have to, whether you're borrowing money from a bank in the form of debt, or whether you're getting it from other investors in the form of equity, and that's often the more risky money. And our business model is all about trying to reduce the amount of equity that is required, so that when we need equity, there's less of it, and that means that there is more effectively money and more value that can be used for other outcomes, whether it's community facilities or whatever. And that's what we go about doing. So one of the key things around that is trying to reduce risk and mitigate risk, because risk is the thing that can often cost money and put the price up. So rather than trying to price in risk, we try to mitigate it. And a good example of that is coming back to that St Mungo's project, which I referred to earlier. In that project, it's quite a good example, because in that project we're introducing an institutional funder into the project, and we've done a lot of work to de-risk it. And so instead of the typical arrangement where someone might expect to receive a 20% profit on the cost of all these things, that's the cost of the money that's going into it. In our instance, it's around the 10% level, so it's actually working much harder, and actually it's an appropriate return for the risk taken, because we've mitigated it. And so there is more value that can go to other outcomes and other outputs. So that's one example of it. One other example is actually just using our resources better and more cleverly and intelligently. I don't actually want to spend loads of money on lots of agents with marketing boards and all this kind of stuff around the place. I'd rather spend the money on working with the people who live and work around here, and actually they will come and occupy the space anyway. So use the money in a different way, and that's another idea too. But that's enough about Stories and the delivery model. I'm going to hand over to Paul. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. So one of the, by taking that different financial approach, one of the ways that money can be used is to underpin the development of a variety of community assets across the site. So we've earmarked around 3,800 square metres of space for a wide variety of different uses, from a Lido workshop space, but also the entire wider public realm within the site, which will be owned by Mayday. And this is important because this enables us to take control of how that site is used. What are the types of tenants that are operating within those, and what do they deliver to the community? And it's very much our view that through perpetuity, the community would be in control of who are the tenants that operate within those particular assets and buildings. So to do that, they would be owned by Mayday Saxonvale, but at that point, we would be looking at possibly a name change for the company, which is maybe taking it through the delivery phase, and absolutely a reconstitution of its governance framework with all the right representations from across the community and the town council as the local democratic institution. And any profits that are generated in time from those community assets would then be able to be deployed back into the community, either in Saxonvale or in the wider community. So we've engaged with a consultancy called PRD, who we were put in contact with by Stories. And the first thing that we tasked them with doing was producing an economic statement which supports our planning application, something you have to produce for something of this scale. And that's really looking at the quantifiable benefits of, particularly the employment space that we're delivering. And you can see that it's looking at supporting 540 jobs overall and generating a significant boost to the Frome economy. What we're now working on with them is a kind of wider economic manifesto narrative, and we're hoping to publish that in the next week or two. And what that's trying to do is to go beyond, the purely quantifiable projections, but talk about what's the overall strategy for the economy that Saxonvale can contribute to, given its scale within the overarching town centre, and how can it play to Frome's strengths and spirit. So the case for change, environmental, social, and imperative, and economic. I'll maybe focus tonight on the employment change. Amend its local plans, set a requirement for employment space in 2014 to generate a certain number of jobs. Well, as we can see, since then, we've actually had a reduction in employment. We've lost more employment sites to housing. So the situation has become even more acute and its need. So we see that we can use Saxonvale to generate a new economic narrative for Frome. Absolutely, the kind of bedrock of that is the wider commercial space that we're looking to deliver to very simply generate the jobs that Frome needs, and to unlock the huge potential of the businesses in Frome. We've got a huge number of businesses that are looking to expand, get to a certain scale, and then have nowhere to go. And indeed, there's a printing and framing company actually in the Silk Mill on Saxonvale in its wider sense, who is moving now and leaving. And if there was space, they would be staying. And there's countless kind of maker businesses in particular, where Frome is acting as an incubator for these businesses. They get to a certain scale, nowhere to go, and leave. It's a massively lost opportunity. But beyond that, and particularly using our community assets and the control we have over the wider public realm, we'd look to put in place and foster some of the principles that we've got there. And we didn't, these principles aren't really just the invention of us as a team. They're really reflective of Frome's own ethos and spirit as it stands today. I'll just touch on a couple of them. Certainly is circular. There's lots of community groups and enterprises looking at the reuse of materials and assets and equipment. Retaining wealth within the town by supporting independent businesses that work here and that then maybe export out of the town and bring more wealth into the town. And offering security of tenure and space. For a lot of these community assets where we're leasing them to a tenant, we'll be doing it probably on commercial terms. But what we'll be giving them is the security of space, the ability to expand that space as they grow, and the length of tenure. And that's often really what these businesses are looking for, not necessarily just a discount. And by operating on those assets on a commercial basis, it means we've got more available to offer a discount to those other bodies that might need it, but can contribute something to the community. Right. So I'll now hand over to Andrew. Tell us a bit more about it's that one, yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Andrew Kirby, Director and Founder of AK Architects in Totnes. We're a practice that's been working exclusively with communities and community ownership schemes for over 15 years. Mayday Saxonvale is one of those schemes, but we've got experience working across community ownership schemes with social value and environmental value at the heart of them for quite a long time. So the models are often varied and change and adapt to different economic and social needs within different community areas, but ultimately the objectives and the outcomes are often very similar. It's all for community benefit and to get a model in which we can deliver on the needs of the climate crisis and the types of development that are going to start to address the kind of quality environmentally designed sites and buildings that we need to see in the local area. So the model behind the master plan approach for Mayday Saxonvale was effectively for a genuinely mixed use model. So we looked at all the different uses, health and well-being, environmental, landscape, buildings, and the different uses that Paul's just gone through. to understand how we can shape a master plan that starts to serve that process, serve that community through the Saxonvale site. And then part of that is understanding how to break that site down, turn it into a genuinely meaningful sort of placemaking strategy that has engagement with potential stakeholders to influence and shape that master plan as it goes forward. So in very simple terms, this is a very simplistic breakdown of the site. Johnny from Studio SAR and Simon are going to talk about the detail of the scheme and the landscaping in it. So I'm just going to talk very strategically around the shape of the master plan and the uses. Is effectively looked at how to break the site down, allocate the uses, and understand how they can be managed and delivered under potential stakeholder groups, and then costed and understood as energy models as well. So effectively, we break down the site by just looking at it strategically. So kind of more crucially, on the western end of the site, I think I've got this right. This is the historic Merchants Barton Quarter. Now this is effectively the heritage part of the site linked to the conservation area and St. John's. So it's a very important part of the site, and understanding that in terms of scale and placemaking is very important. We've got the commercial quarter here, which is a large area of existing buildings complemented with new mixed-use buildings that also effectively drive the majority of the commercial model behind the viability of the scheme. This is John's School Quarter. Potential of St. John's School as a stakeholder occupying that part of the site. We've got the Eastern Residential Quarter over here, which is 100% residential, but meeting the housing needs of the site and of the area, but also an appropriate context and connectivity to existing residential neighbours. We've got Central Mixed Use Quarter here, and that is effectively looking at quite high density commercial and residential use right in the centre of the site. This is something called the tiny homes. So it's an understanding the need for starter homes effectively in the community. They're minimum size residential custom build units to give people the opportunity to get that first step onto the housing ladder. And that's been done in a way that was driven by trying to make the most of the use of the land on site and get the right level of density, and just being innovative in delivering on needs. So underneath that is effectively 2 stories of car parking that helps meet the car parking needs of the site. And then here we've got the Hill Village. Now it's another residential area that is contextually linked more closely to Vicarage Street, and meeting more needs for housing within the area. There's another area of starter units, effectively tiny homes again, but on a more conventional delivery model, which is above another layer of car parking on the western end of the site, which are called the press deck homes. Now, how these are connected up is the infrastructure and the overall master plan is about the spaces that join these buildings together. So Simon's going to go into that in a lot more detail, but effectively we're understanding how these quarters link and create a cohesive site. So effectively the spaces that connect them up. So we've got primary east-west axis through here, Merchants Avenue, which is a large public space, pedestrian priority. It does provide vehicular access for emergencies and deliveries to service the site, but ultimately it's a public space for people to use and spill out onto. So it brings people that are working and living in this area, so this sort of kind of live, work and play philosophy into a vibrant central street that is a continuation of what you've already got in Frome and holding on to and enhancing that vibrancy. There's landscaped quarters through areas through here, and then we've got what we're calling the green corridor. So lower green corridor at the bottom end of the site and an upper green corridor to get a big green kind of lung running through the centre of the site. And then the large green area, which is at the bottom of the site, north end, which is where we've got leisure and Lido. It's effectively a flood risk part of the site, so it's all given over to amenity space. Riverside Park, and we've put a Lido in there as part of an overall health and well-being aspect to the site. So that just shows a sort of rough breakdown, and then obviously when you see the detailed model later on and you see what Johnny and Simon have got to say, understand how the architecture and the articulation placemaking is achieved through the individual designs of those buildings. So just again, looking high level strategically is understanding these spaces that kind of bring the site together. So the Riverside Park, green corridor coming through the centre of the site, the road coming through the middle, the Merchants Avenue, and then the Merchants Courtyard. Now we've got two key public spaces. So one is, we're calling the Bow Exchange, which is next to the press shops and not stores. And that's effectively where a big spilling out open space, and it's part of a kind of gathering, a heart of the site, if you like, where people come and gather, and it forms part of that sort of animation and vibrancy of a mixed community. And then you've got the Merchants Courtyard, which is much more intricate in looking, conservation style design space, which is effectively looking at how those historic buildings form an intricate and quieter public space that's more appropriate for its connections to the conservation area in the town context nearby. So parking just is a key aspect of the design. So we don't want a site that is dominated by car parking. We don't want places and spaces to be dominated by cars. So effectively it's all hidden. Now, all the infrastructure allows for vehicles to be able to get to all parts of the site for vehicles, for delivery and maintenance and emergencies. But basically we've lumped the parking into big areas that serve the rest of the site. Now there's drop-off zones, and any disabled requirements, anything like that is you're able to stop outside the house and access it. But basically parking is linked largely to car parking areas within the site. So these are all hidden. That's actually hidden underground. This is 2 stories with housing and public space on top. This again is 2 stories of parking with housing and public space on top. The school has its own parking, and there's a bit of parking allocated into the centre of the site for deliveries. So the car parking is met, the needs of the site are met through the strategic approach, but we've put it out to the perimeter as much as possible and avoided a car-dominated site. So then again, looking at existing buildings on the site. So whilst there's obviously heritage assets on the site, it's looking at that conservation, that heritage gain that we want to achieve. There's the Old Town Wall, there's heritage assets we're trying to understand and read and interpret into the site in a meaningful way, as opposed to seeing them as a problem. We see them as an opportunity. And again, whilst there's some aspects of the site that relate to, directly to heritage, we're not assuming there's no heritage linked to these buildings here just because they're not listed. So we're understanding them both in terms of their history and their meaningful relationship to the history of the site and to Frome, but also as an embodied energy factor. They've already been built. What can we do? How there needs to be a process we go through before we can justify assuming to demolish buildings. So it's going through the other way of assuming to keep them until we know that we can't. So these are going to be repurposed, the building fabric upgraded and turned into flexible and adaptable workshops and commercial units to help with the viability model of the whole site. And this graphic actually just shows the extent of buildings we're keeping, compared to demolishing, so it's a vast majority across the site. And then environmental principles. So, the big drivers, whilst we're looking for these kind of gains, these net gains across the site, ultimately the big sort of headline drivers are, social value gains and environmental gains. And the environmental principles are broken down into kind of sort of 4 key areas really. And the first starting point, let's go back. The first starting point is embodied energy. So it's looking at, using local supply chains, using local materials, and understanding the local economy and how materials in the area can be brought into the scheme to be specified into the buildings to help with the local economy and reduce the embodied energy of bringing materials from afar, retaining existing buildings, which I've touched on, and renewable materials as well. So looking at making sure that we can use materials that we know can be replaced and aren't sort of part of an overall degrading environmental factor across the world. Then applying that into energy efficient construction principles. So that is making sure buildings, don't lose energy. So we create a very, very low energy model on the buildings. So it's really easy to do. It just needs to be invested into. It needs to be designed in the right way. and buildings don't need to leak energy unnecessarily. So looking at airtight design, modern methods of construction, so precision, and then an energy standard, which is basically a certain level of insulation. That means that the heat demand of the houses is so low that they can almost sort of look after themselves. We're trying to qualify that through various standards. So there's the Future Home Standard and what's called the AECB standard. So it's the Association for Environment Conscious Building. It's linked to the passive house model. And effectively, it's a specific target that we want to achieve, and that will qualify what we're trying to say in terms of this overall energy model. Then, once you've got your low energy model, the idea is it doesn't need that much servicing. So you're designing out the services by investing into the building fabric in the first principle. So looking at renewable technologies to serve the energy that is needed. Now we've got largely south-facing roofs, and we've effectively got all of the energy, at least on this site, being met by renewable technologies. And subject to the final energy model being published, we expect that there's going to be a net energy contributor. So there could be an opportunity for this site to provide more energy serving the local area of Frome in excess of what the demands on this site will be. And then landscape gains as well. And again, Simon will talk about the detailed landscape design, but effectively looking at what's already there and making sure that we improve on biodiversity. We create, looking at green roofs, living walls, looking at public spaces. All of these things are designed to enhance biodiversity. So that's nature, and then that starts to double up with health and well-being and a sense of living and working in a healthy site, which is also very, very environmentally friendly. So there's a gain basically on green space on this proposal from what's existing on the site currently. So it's increased biodiversity, and then something called sustainable urban drainage, which is using surface water in an integrated and sustainable way that connects and integrates the landscaping principles. And then we touched on it before, pedestrian and cycle priority. So the scheme is, design-wise, is underpinned by these values and wants to hold on to those all the way through. And in terms of how this viability stacks up and what stories I've looked at in terms of the overall development model, the cost associated with achieving this is already tied in. So it's a realistic cost. It's benchmarked to successful schemes, and we know it's deliverable as a meaningful mixed-use sustainable site. And I'm going to pass you over to Simon, who's going to go through the landscape design.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Simon Brown. I'm a landscape architect and founder and director of Land Story Design. And it's been a real privilege to work on this project. I came to Frome about 7-8 years ago and immediately saw and heard about Saxonvale and what an amazing, I just saw what potential there to do something amazing. And I was also aware of how many people had tried and put energy into trying to make something happen. So it's really a privilege to have worked on this. And I'm really excited also in terms of landscape, in terms of the value that can be generated from these community assets, actually put into landscape, into maintaining it, into operating. So I'll just talk a little bit about some of the site principles and then go into a bit of detail. So really, I think water has been the backbone of the site. There is an old, the water course was different previously. You've got a kind of historic spring line here and another one here. And of course, the site slopes this way up towards the river. So there's a natural inclination for the water to move that way. And so what we've tried to do is kind of use that as a foundation and then tie it into what we call green infrastructure. So how people might move through the site, where there are trees and really beautiful planting and kind of tying that into these kind of active routes. And then the site's kind of cut by these kind of vehicular routes, which Andy did touch on. Here we go. Okay, so just looking at the Riverside Park. So yeah, we notionally spoken about this having a crossing point, which would be really great in terms of making connectivity to Rodden Meadows or to the other part of town. Pedestrian routes up from this end, from the car parks, possibly a future one cantilevered in from the blue ball. And you can't quite see here, but this is all about, where possible, we're just integrating water management. So soft features into the landscape. And the basic principles is just trying to take all of the rainwater that falls on the site and run it through into the landscape and use that. So grow trees, grow flowers, provide, pollinators, a source of nectar. So again, I'll show you some images which will kind of highlight that. We've got a kind of a park here which hits the policy requirements. Again, just thinking about natural play and balance and all that awesome stuff that kids need. Lido, wouldn't that just be so fabulous? And then I think, I'll talk about this a little bit more on another slide, but this is the kind of historic watercourse restored and introduced to kind of meander. Currently, it's got a very straight sort of channelized form. So introducing meander and different kind of water levels, and then tying that into this kind of school playground there. And then there are these kind of quite hard urban kind of main route up here, which again would be softened by trees and water. So here's some imagery just to kind of help illuminate what this kind of park might feel like. So yeah, bridge structure could be quite cool and contemporary, and then decks, places to sit, have a picnic, hang out with your kids, watch them play, and yeah, just generally have quite a nice time. Then looking towards the school, so this is the proposed footprint of the school. Again, looking here, we'd say, okay, how do you take all of the rainwater that falls on the school building and just, drive that into the ground, putting it this way, and then where you've got again, this kind of canal piece, you'd have a kind of dam here, if you like, with two different control systems, so that in peak rainfall, and it's really hurtling rain, this area would kind of fill up and become, would go up and down as you get, peak rainfall events. And then that becomes more interesting in terms of biodiversity and habitat and niche species. And at the bottom, you'd have the kind of the playing fields, could be floodable if you've got peak flood events. And then kind of, wildlife areas. I think there's a bat hide here and tree houses and stuff like that. And then of course, orchard, meadow, again, swales with bridges. The swales is this kind of drainage piece. And then a secure connection for the school to get into the town, but that very much being a kind of buffer and a boundary, so that this is sort of safe space for the school, and then kind of planting and softening to sort of screen that. So this kind of illustrates it quite nicely. I think this is such a cool image. If you imagine that was your school and you got rainwater and really, water kind of activating and enlivening your learning environment. And, again, all this kind of good stuff in the ecological area, fires and all the stuff that we know children need, natural play, balance, etc. So this is a kind of a view. You look here on the plan, the master plan. If you imagine this kind of pedestrian route, which again, we've got another image from, you'd be standing here looking on a kind of bridge, looking down this watercourse. And so you'd have a hard edge to the urban side, which would allow a greater depth of water, and this kind of public realm, quite hard, again, space for people to walk, stop, relax. And then this kind of marginal zone that I spoke about, where the water level might go up or down, and then trees to kind of help buffer and safeguard views in and out of the school, etc. And then again, this just being a really wicked route up to the park and the Lido. So again, just thinking about what that might look and feel like. There are all sorts of interesting things you can do with kind of soft solutions, sticking wood in there. Maybe we can get the beavers to come up from Asda. But yeah, just this, hard edge and then soft, like really rich, wild space in the heart of town, really. And maybe even these kind of interactive features for kids to run across if it's not too health and safety conscious. Again, that sort of hard route that I spoke about running through the site, if you imagine that's kind of looking up here. So this was the bow exchange that Andrew spoke about. So it's really kind of interesting space. You might have the cars kind of moving through, but because of the shared surface principles that I'll talk about in a minute, the idea is that essentially you'd slow down as a driver. But again, these features are kind of water retentive features in the landscape. And again, they might provide a place to sit and watch life go by. So here's some great works by other landscape architects. This is Sheffield, a really great project where the council sort of ripped up a whole road and kind of redirected all the storm water into these sequence of check dams. And so all of those hydrocarbons are taken out and filtered by the soil and by the biological activity from the roots and kind of cleaned. Yeah, again, just look at what you can achieve with a bit of investment in planting and green infrastructure. What a fabulous thing to have in your town. That's actually in Sweden, I think. And then just sort of characterized by nice materials, quality materials. Okay, this is the historic quarter that again Andy spoke about, kind of being really important. And if you think about what's delightful about Catherine Hill or Cheap Street, it's for me it's you know, the materials on the floor are convivial, they're cobbly, they're sort of characterful. There's different building heights, shapes, and so it's kind of invoking and inviting some of that into the public realm design for this area. Reusing the building to create and kind of add value to the already great event space that's the Silk Mill, and maybe kind of a nod to Cheap Street and a kind of reel or a water feature that just helps to kind of make it a fun place to have balloons. So again, just thinking about, here are some imagery that just kind of might give you a feel of what that might look like. So really high quality stones, so paving materials, maybe dealing with a change in level with nice steps that you can also sit on, incidental seating with sort of, again, planting really rich and lush, and then maybe some trees in the hard landscape. Okay, this is the main pedestrian sort of priority concourse that we've spoken about, Merchants Avenue. And I think what's quite cool about this is, so this is the kind of shared surface principles which came from Holland. It's got a funny name like Woonerf or something. And the principle of that, as I said, is there are no curbs. So there's no difference between the road and the pavement. And so as a driver, you move slowly. As a cyclist, you're more conscientious. And as a pedestrian, I think you feel more liberated. And so paving materials, paving patterns sort of strike across the street, and it becomes just a different space. And maybe hard planting trees and raised planters. And then what we've got going on underground is essentially what's called a Stockholm tree pit. And it's an amazing kind of attenuation volume for holding water, and it's kind of designed to take all of the rainwater off the streets and push it down into this space, which is lined because it's a contaminated site down there, and basically provide the optimum growing conditions for trees for root growth. So the amazing work done in Sweden to sort of pioneer this, and essentially you just have amazing street trees, which often we don't have in this country because they're planted in sort of concrete coffins. So this is a way of, you know, mitigating that, increasing the kind of the good feeling of the streets, you know, lowering the temperatures in summer and increasing them in winter, etc. And that might look a little bit like this. This is, I think, Brighton. Again, that just kind of no curb, that's actually just a drainage gutter, and you see the car and pedestrians just interacting really nicely. This is a great one in London, which is Hackney Circus. It's a kind of crazy crossroads, and I cycled through here once and was like, wow, what's going on? You know, where's the road? And you know, that's actually a bit mental, but it does really work. And then again, you know, how might these really just be great spaces? Okay, that's me done with that. That's the later.
Well, I'm excited. Hi, I'm Johnny Buckland, Studio SAR. I have my practice in the Silk Mill, and yeah, what a pleasure to be in that site and get a chance to look at the site every day and go, wow, we've got to do something with this that is different and right for this town. So starting with a question, which we didn't show last time, but we think this is really important to just understand how big Saxonvale is in comparison to what we might all think of Froome's town centre. So the white is what we think it is. What do you think it is? Obviously, the little curvy element here is Catherine's Hill, cheese and grain at the top. And then this is obviously the main road past where we are now. And you can see that we think it's 25% of it is Saxonvale. And that's a huge opportunity that we cannot miss with a house dominant master plan. So I'm going to talk about two things: connectivity and a little bit more detail about what the architecture could actually be for lots of these different quarters and for lots of the individual different buildings. So Simon's touched on quite a lot of the connectivity at the top here with the rivers, the Riverside Park. But this diagram is just trying to explain the primary vehicular routes through the site, and where we will be able to get cars for one-off deliveries, disabled access, and those sorts of things. And the main thing here is that Vicarage Street will be a one-way route back round and then two-way as we follow through on the main new high street looking back up to the Garsdale Junction. Pedestrian and cycle routes, obviously, as Andrew and Simon have explained, moving cars out of the public realm provides for a lot more opportunity for people to walk and cycle safely through the heart of this site. Obviously, crossing this vehicular junction here back onto Kingsway, it's a really great pedestrian link cutting across through this block down onto the main street. Obviously, linking back up with the historic Merchants Barton, which passes all the way through the back of the site, just south or north of the Hill Village, and then across back over to Garsdale Junction at the top. We think we've created a super permeable site, and we really feel that shifting the car parking will make it be a really pleasant place to be. So design is a big topic, but I've lived in Bath for many years, and I see Frome as a similar place in terms of its fabric, in terms of the materials used, and obviously has a shared history on so many fronts. And so variety is the name of the game in terms of how we're treating each particular quarter and how we're treating the roofscape. And we really hope this sketch gets that across alongside the video and the animation that was produced. But I think what's important here is to pick up the roofscapes that the existing warehouses bring, the roof gardens and terraces in the mixed use quarter. There's a combination of terraces and balconies in the eastern residential quarter. There'll be really exciting variety up in the tiny homes development, and exciting more traditional roof forms in the Hill Village. So I kind of want to make sure we've got time for questions. So I'm gonna maybe go through these quite quickly. But what we try to do is give a clue to what the architecture could be for each of these quarters. So in our design and access statement, we included a sort of quite simple elevational sketch. And this is the Hill Village. We've taken our inspiration from Innox Hill and the way that it surrounds a very sort of community type set of gardens, and really playing with raised access and terraces. Commercial zone, again, what wonderful opportunity to reuse the warehouses there and keep some of the historic fabric and history of the site, stripping them back and turning them into fantastic, flexible, commercial business incubator spaces. The tiny homes, so making the best use of space, gardens on top of two-story parking with tiny home structures above. Really trying not to invent the wheel in terms of what the architectures should be. It's not a city type development trying to be sort of put onto this market town. It's accepting that streets have language, and we know what successful streets feel like. This is an example of Clifton up in the top corner, where we can play with successful mixed use typologies, where you have active street frontages at the bottom and residential above. This is similar to the tiny homes, but this is the parking next to the press shops, where we're obviously trying to work with providing proof that alternative housing types can help with the housing crisis that we're in. So this is starter homes, which are sort of a studio type area model. And then, as we're all excited, the Riverside Park with the Lido. Again, what a fantastic opportunity that would be. The East Residential Quarter, townhouses as terraces that look onto that main avenue through the site. And then quickly coming on to the Heritage Quarter, where what we've tried to do here is sympathetically work with new build sitting next to the buildings that we love. So not rising up 3 stories that look onto this courtyard, but allowing using the change of levels to accommodate underground hidden car parking. And this particular top floor is a set of gables. And so this is predominantly a 2-story with gables on the top, with the opportunity to step that so that you have terraces that look onto that new public space, which is intimate, it's responsive to the uses that this particular part of town already has, with parties, weddings, festivals, and really trying to create a space that helps that thrive in the future. And then just talking about St. John's, again, another opportunity for Frome to have first-class education facilities on the site. And this is just an impression of what that could be. And just to touch on good home principles, really trying to create homes that are fit for the future and provide the best quality for a living experience. So minimum 2.5 meter floor to ceiling heights, and trying to get as much natural daylight in as possible. And again, that comes back to the energy conversation that Andrew was talking about, just efficient, low maintenance and low running costs. And we're going to play the animation video now. Thank you. Sorry.
Talk among yourselves.
thank you, Paul and the team. Right, I'm going to go straight to questions because obviously time is limited. So I'm going to take a couple of questions from the floor first, and then take a few online questions, and then we'll alternate as the evening goes on. This lady here first, please.
Thank you very much. I feel very excited. Totally to use my whole thing. I just would appreciate though understanding a little bit more about the vehicular access. I live on Garsdale, so that's my personal interest. But Vicarage Street, one way down. How many entrances and exits are there for vehicles on to the centre of the site, or is Garsdale the only in and out really to the centre?
So obviously coming down Garsdale, it's still two-way. And then one way, obviously going off of the junction down Vicarage Street. So it's going to have the traffic plan is for it to have a kind of cleaner journey through. And I think the important thing here is to remember that this is a town centre site. And so the ideas of cutting off Vicarage Street, for example, from traffic coming up or would create big problems at the junction. So the traffic plan is definitely all about trying to create the movement of traffic through so it doesn't create issues. And it's the main priority there is about pedestrian and cycle infrastructure too. And so some of those one-way systems really help with that.
Sorry, I didn't quite understood that fully. So is the only entrance and exit up at the top of Portway on that many roundabouts currently?
Yes.
That's still the only entrance and exit?
No, because you can come down Vicarage Street.
Vicarage Street as well. So
Yeah.
two entrances
Yeah.
and one exit.
Exactly.
So anyone going down Vicarage Street would have to come up.
Yeah.
So,
whilst I'm very excited by what I've seen, I'm also aware that planning permission has already been given to somebody. How does that float this legally?
Sure, and I'm conscious there's a question here from Tim Cuttings as well, which kind of there he is, which talks to the same kind of question. So maybe I'll read out Tim's question and then answer both in the same vein. So the plans you've proposed are a considerable improvement on the Mendip Acorn proposal, and I hope the planning board will approve them. However, that seems to be a minor hurdle compared to the barrier of Mendip's declared purpose of making a very large profit for itself, brackets as well as Acorn. What therefore is the Mayday Saxonvale Group's strategy to persuade the landowner to use their plan rather than the one they themselves have proposed and given outline planning permission? So I think it's first totally right to say that this is an unusual situation. There's no question about that. But I think the landscape in front of Mendip District Council is quite different from what it was earlier in the year. So the Acorn scheme was approved in January of this year, 11.3 in support. Since that time, because that decision was legally unsound, it went back to the planning board on the 15th of September and it was approved 7.6. So that dynamic's already shifting and no consent has yet been granted for Acorn to start building works on the site. So there is still the door ajar, I think open, for a change of direction. And the other important aspect of course, that's changed that landscape is that there is now a new outline planning application from ourselves, which is policy compliant, which responds directly to Mendip's own plan for employment space, affordable housing and other aspects. And at the moment has 700 positive comments, supportive comments on the planning portal, and a supportive comment from the Chamber of Commerce. And on the flip side, we've got the Acorn scheme, which was rejected by 500 rejective comments and none in support and rejected by the Town Council, by the Civic Society and the Chamber of Commerce. So we've got these two routes in front of us and they're in front of Mendip District Council as well. And it's now an active choice for them to decide to continue down a route which doesn't achieve their own plan and has been rejected by Frome when we have the polar opposite on this side. And I guess the question as to how we get them to further entice them, encourage them to change direction is really just Frome's, if people within Frome think this is a better plan for Frome, is to make their voice heard as clearly and loudly as possible. And the primary route to do that is to make your comment on the planning portal in support of the application. And the final thing I would say is that you know, it looks a bit kind of unlikely and hopeful that they would change direction, but often political changes of direction seem totally impossible until they happen. And then they seem like they were completely inevitable all along.
I'll take one more question from the room and then go to Jake. This gentleman here.
It's following on from that. Are you communicating with David Warburton, the MP? Is he responding to the
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, David Warburton has been a supporter of the Mayday Saxonvale campaign all the way through, and we are in communication with David, and he's sort of supporting us behind the scenes.
So just to add on to that, then if you want support, then you need to, because I only really got involved 4 weeks ago when I happened from video. I knew of it a year ago and so on, but since then, so there's thousands of people who do not know what's happening. So there needs to be somehow a group of us putting stuff through doors or whatever, you know, something like this with the video links, and then just putting it through to people who have busy lives and families, they just can't get attached to it.
I mean, I totally agree. It is the big challenge in front of us. You probably hadn't heard a lot about us before because we were preparing heads down to get our outline application ready, and now, you know, we're trying our best, but we need to, you're absolutely right, we need to do more. But I think it's also incumbent on those that think this is a good idea to spread the word. If you know somebody who you think would be supportive of this, to tell them about it and to encourage them to make a supportive comment.
Is anyone here tonight that would join a group between us, you know, distribute something like this with the video link? It's so impressive. We're also busy. Between us, we could actually do something, you know. I mean, Keith, for example, from the houses there, you're on the areas. I don't have many people on my contact email stuff. I don't go onto media links and so on, but there are people here who do.
No, you're quite right. The common view in the town is that they'll never get Saxonvale done. You're arguing about it forever. But what people, I think, you know, in planning terms, this is a site that's designated for development. That means it is inevitable that it is going to be developed. And there isn't a possibility that it isn't going to be. And it's coming up right down the tracks, and we're staring it in the face. And we now have two alternative doors, as Paul says, that we can go through. We can go through that Acorn high density housing door, or we can go through the Mayday Saxonvale door. But one of those doors is going to be opened.
Okay, thank you. Jane, do you want to take some questions from the
Thank you, yes.
Zoom?
Just want to let everybody in the room know, because you might not be aware, but we actually have 104 people with us on Zoom. I know they can see you, but you can't see them.
Thank you.
So I've currently got about 20 questions on the question and answer board. So I might not get through them all, but I'll pick out a couple to start with. I'm going to combine two to start with. Is the housing to be affordable or affordable with a capital A? And will local young people be given priority to purchase these?
So we've set a level of 40% affordable housing, and what we've committed to at the moment is that 30% of that 40% will be fully policy compliant. In other words, it will be 80% social rent and 20% shared ownership or a similar scheme. And you know, we need to get to the next level of detail in terms of commercials with the landowner before we could land on exactly what type of tenure would be in that final 10%. But our aspiration and our intention would be to do whatever we can in line with what the community needs. So if we could extend social rent through that 10% again, we'd look to do that. And I think in terms of young people, one of our intentions, but we're still exploring how to formalise this, is to give first refusal on open market homes to those that live in Frome or have a connection to Frome, so that we can put that priority in place. So young people growing up in Frome would get that priority, and we've got a lot of starter homes within our residential units that they could take advantage of.
I'm just watching the notes coming up here. Would it be possible when you're answering questions to use the microphones, please?
Yeah,
because
sure.
I think they're struggling to hear on Zoom.
Will do. Thank you.
Which mic is it?
Okay, I'll take one question here. Can you talk into the mic, please? It's just for the benefit of the people on Zoom, they can't hear the question.
In terms of comparisons of volumes of housing, how do the numbers compare with this scheme as with the Acorn?
So the Acorn has 300 residential units, and we've got 182. So that was 300 from Acorn's perspective, and 182 with our scheme. So we try to be as innovative as we can to, get the units up, because we know there is a demand for housing. But there's no question we're treating this as a properly mixed use development.
So, please, thank you.
The non-bank petitioning is delighted at the prospect of a development with 5 quarters. So really well done on that. I have a particular interest in the Western Warehouse. And I wonder what, if any, thoughts you've got for that building as of now.
Damien, do you want to talk about the
Yes, I mean.
intent and the intentions we've got for that space?
Yeah.
You might just need to speak very loudly, maybe.
Yeah, I think that is it?
It's working.
So I'm aware that the TACATL have had discussions and have developed plans, and there are other groups that have also been involved in those discussions. There are cultural delivery organisations, one in particular, like Swan, I think, that has been involved, and we want to follow up on those discussions, on those plans. We want to develop those discussions, and we want to arrive at a use for the Western Warehouse that is for the benefit of the whole community, and particularly the cultural organisations, I think, within Fring. Yeah, that's really been our intention.
Excellent.
I've got another written down question.
Yeah, one was submitted earlier.
Yeah. So this one's from Michael Dunk, sitting in front of us. How can you assure the people that you will be able to raise the money required to buy the site from NDC at the market rate, which might be as much as 9 million or even more, as NDC has spent money remediating the site? I've assumed that the Mayday will have to justify to its residents that it has achieved best value if it disposes of the site, although it may be possible to justify a lower sale price if the social gain to Froome is taken into account. That one's Paul.
Yes, okay, so it's true that a local authority is able to transact at a discount up to £2 million. We would be interested in having that conversation with them, but our assumptions are not a conditional on it, that it's certainly something we're looking at. The question of best consideration, local authorities are obliged, I think it's under the Local Authority Act, I think it's section 123, to achieve best consideration in the disposal of their assets. When they undertook their transaction with the present intended purchaser, that the site didn't have a detailed or an outline planning application, and the process of valuing land generally then falls to taking the most commercial view of every variable. And that's where we are now. We have a residential-led, intensely dense outcome of the way they've transacted. We think it would be reasonable and legal for them to price this site on the basis of the consent that we are seeking. And so I think it's quite reasonable to expect that. Now, obviously, a local authority are under the conditions of austerity. They generally look to their assets to sort of plug these gaps. We believe there is a route to match any number that we believe is flying around. That will in part be a capital sum, and in part, we believe because of the greater mixed use nature, there's going to be enhanced business rates income from the site over a period of time. And when you net that back using treasury discount rates, we think it could look quite compelling in the round. In terms of the actually buying the site, Stories has access to sufficient funds to do that. But in fact, as Richard was saying at the beginning, actually Stories' model is to try and avoid buying land because it starts, clocks running on returns on money. And what we'd rather do is have an arrangement whereby we would be paying for the land at the end of each phase, so sort of using receipts. So actually, sort of speaking to Stories' model of being equity light, we would rather avoid spending that money because then we don't need the returns. And that's what allows us to operate at very lean margins. So we believe, in the round, our approach should be able to unlock a reasonable return for the local authority. So that's the way we've approached it.
The only thing about that is that they might not see it in the same light that you do, because they'll look for returns sooner than later. And in fact, even at the moment, they've got a model built in. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say this, John, am I?
You are.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm allowed to say, well, they can lend the money directly to their own preferred, at the moment, developer. So there's a link there which makes the money circular. It's quite bizarre, but they can do that. So I'm just wondering how they're going to see it. I can see from your point of view that it's a brilliant conceived idea. It's fantastic for Frome. I do like what you're doing. It ticks loads of boxes that we need ticking, which aren't being ticked. But I'm just concerned about the finances.
I think the thing to remember is that we don't believe that the consent is in line with policy, and I think our view at the moment is that no consent has been given. The price that they've been offered is subject to planning, and that has not come forward. So, notwithstanding there might be a higher number flying around, it's for a scheme that is non-policy compliant, and in principle, notwithstanding the decisions that have been made, it should be unacceptable. So look, there's some way to go. There's some way to go to.
But if your scheme's approved at planning,
material consideration evaluation, certainly.
Then in that case, it becomes a live scheme and can be compared directly to the Acorn scheme. And in terms of land value, you can choose which one you want in a way. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, mate. Jane, can we take some from the online, please?
Yeah, I've been asked to read this one out. So, while trying to get the best for our great town, my other main interest is its wildlife, especially our river. From both schemes I've seen, still leaves buildings very near to the floodplain for 100 years flood, and obviously concerned with the road, roof surface runoff and the rubbish it is likely to carry into my Smiley Face River. What, please, is in place to stop this?
Hi, great question. Well, I think that this is the whole kind of approach of the SUDS piece. So maybe in a more standard development, the rainwater will kind of run off a house or a car park, say, and then it will go through networks of pipes, and it will go into this big hole in the ground full of plastic crates, which is a kind of really strange concept where the water will stink and go fetid, and at a certain point be pumped out to the river. And that's frankly not acceptable, but that's generally the kind of path of least resistance in the development model. And the approach that we're adopting, which is kind of best practice all across a lot of Europe and in some places in England, like I showed in Sheffield, say, and that is that all the rainwater is kind of taken and put into soft planting areas. So it's the hydrocarbons are filtered out by the soil medium. They're broken down by the roots of plants. All of the nasties, the pathogens are taken out as well. Nitrogen is taken up, etc. So essentially, you're using plants to biologically filter the water, and you're not putting any plastic crates in, and you're slowing that down. So you're trying to achieve greenfield runoff rates, which we have done, the outline calculations as part of the planning submission with the civil engineers, and we can achieve that. We can achieve those storage volumes on site and that kind of slower rates of release. So there shouldn't be any greater impact on kind of outflows into the river. And then what we've also done, I guess, is just push the limit of where the floodplain is in terms of where we're having storage capacity as much as possible, and allowing for, say, that that learning environment of the school to potentially flood in the worst case scenario. I think it's 1 in 1,000 year. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. Do you want to do one more, Jane?
If we could, please. If we could unmute Ruth Nag and invite her to ask her question directly from the Zoom, that'd be great.
Sorry, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Yeah, really excited about the plan. Overall, just love it. Love the design ideas, the greenness, the whole ethos of it is just so much better than the previous one. But one really specific question is about the number of car parking spaces. So I live on Vicarage Street and we already have trouble parking. So how many car parking spaces have been allowed relative to the number of new dwellings?
So overall, there's 280 car parking spaces and just under 250 when you exclude those assigned to the school. We're working broadly on the basis that for each residential unit, there would be a car parking space available, and also then allowing for visitors that are coming to visit the area to work or to shop or spend time as they're wishing to do. I guess the question around how many more people would be coming through Vicarage Street. So we're thinking, as we said before, there's two routes into the site, both down Garsdale Road and down Vicarage Street, but no one's coming back up Vicarage Street. And we think that that's a proportionate balance between those two entry routes, taking into account that Vicarage Street is a narrow and historical route, but it also gives some better pedestrian access for those going down Vicarage Street, including the residents, into the rest of the site. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thanks so much. I'll take one more from the room. Any question?
I just wondered, I've only been here 17 years, so fairly new in terms of further residents. But I just really looking at that and looking at our very sorry town centre as it sits at the moment, what concerns me slightly is that you'll have that and then you'll have this shiny new thing. And I just wondered if some thought would be given to how you'll embrace the two and join the two and make sure that they support each other, not one steals from the other. Because at the moment, the Westway Centre and around are all looking very sorry for themselves because of COVID and everything that we've gone through and how little town centre was used in that time. And it is so ungreen compared to what you're suggesting that for me, my slight concern would be that we turn our back on that area and then you'd have problems there. So what thoughts be given to that, please?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, my first sort of feeling about answering that is that we really need to be thinking really long term about how the town is growing. Let's think about the amount of housing developments that are on the table. Let's think about the population growth. Let's think about the decline in employment space and actually the quantity of retail units which would perhaps compete with the units that are empty at the moment in the town centre isn't a huge number. And I think what is the contrasting element between the two commercial environments is the quantity of office, commercial, light industrial, business incubator. Maybe it's not so much the front of house stuff that you'd imagine that resides on Catherine Hill or in Westway, for example. That would be my initial thought on that one. I don't know if anyone.
Add something to that?
Yeah.
I think it's a fantastic question, Sarah. I think that the issue is about revitalisation of town centres. That's the way I see it. And how we achieve that, I think, it's not one size fits all. I think it's each town looking at its specialisations and what it can do well and at its strengths, and then making sure that those are serviced and that there are places for those local expressions to take root. And I think that if Saxonvale is there, so close to the town centre, and we've been very careful to make it a soft transition between the existing town centre and Saxonvale. We can take some of those stresses and strains out of the town centre that is currently being experienced in the town centre. Lots of people going around saying, I want this kind of premises, and that premises isn't there that they need. It hasn't got a packing department. It hasn't got a small manufacturing unit. The terms of tenure and occupancy aren't really very flexible enough. And so we see our plan as very much an extension of the town centre. And the other thing I'd like to say, which I didn't mention to your questions, Alex, is that the idea of the community assets is that we've got such a broad range of them because they can deliver, I hope, income streams to the cultural organisations of the town in the future. That's very much what we want to do. Grant funding is very tight. Grants are cut. You know, we have absolutely essential cultural organisations in this town: Freedom Festival, the Merlin, the Black Swan, you know, and of course the Silk Mill. And we're all on a knife edge. You know, it's just a different kind of knife. And Mayday Saxonvale, by delivering this range of community assets, will be able to provide an additional funding stream. It won't come direct from us, it'll come through our partners, particularly the Town Council, we hope. And I think that that's another way of integrating what we're doing into the existing pressures that exist on the town. So sorry to cheat by adding in that extra bit. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Thanks. Jane, should we take one online?
Thank you, yes. Before I do, I just want to say that I've got about 20 outstanding questions, both in the chat and question and answers box. And I just want to assure everybody who has posted a question that we have captured the questions. And as I said, I don't think we'll be able to get to them all this evening, but we will make sure that answers are provided via our website, and I'm sure Mayday will have the answers on their site as well, which they've just confirmed. So the question that I have to read out is: will the shared surface areas be wheelchair accessible in a comprehensive way, not with occasional marginalising dropped pavement paths, but plentiful?
Yeah, 100%. We actually went to quite a high level of detail in designing the site. So we pushed Andy really hard for floor levels of buildings, which is not something you generally do at this stage of design. And we wanted to do that so that we could know that we could get the levels to work, because it's a steep site. And so, you know, for instance, coming from the kind of Silk Mill courtyard down to the shared surface avenue, you know, we've got a whole series of switchback ramps to get down there to accommodate wheelchair use. So absolutely, it's been a priority. Yeah.
I just add something to that very quickly. Yeah. So just to emphasise what Simon said, we've modelled the whole site accurately in 3D. So we looked at the existing levels, understood everything about the existing site and everything about how that site topography works, and then the buildings within it and access to all the levels has all been worked out. So it's a fully accessible site, and the level of detail is beyond what's required for outline planning. We wanted to make sure we understood the site, which helped with the cost and viability as well.
Got a question here? Yeah, thanks very much. Brilliant presentation. It's great. Just picking up the point with the gentleman with the very smart hat over there and other people about how you mobilise this kind of feeling of kind of the community working to support this. Damien, you've been leading this campaign from the start. How do we do that? How do we get to a point where we're leaflet dropping or we are building out the social media presence and so on?
Okay, well, communication is incredibly difficult. And there is this inbuilt resistance to Saxonvale, which we certainly met right at the beginning, not another conversation about Saxonvale. But we really are talking about the future of Frome. You know, it's so important. And so I don't have any magic answers to that, but I've always felt that if Frome genuinely wants an alternative to the Acorn scheme, then and makes its voice loud enough, then we will have that alternative and we'll be able to express ourselves as a town.
But in a practical way.
Yeah.
In a practical way.
Hi, I'm Chloe. Yeah, I'd be really happy at the end of this meeting to collect names and email addresses of people that would be willing to join together as a community and do things like leaflet dropping, because it is something that we're really aware of, that we're only managing to connect with like a cross section of Bryn community via social media. We've got a very strong social media link, it's a great website, but obviously not everyone is going to engage with that. So anyone who would like to be involved in that, please do leave your contact details with me or anyone on the team, and we will get to put a meeting together and come up with some practical ideas. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'll take some more questions from the floor, John. I think you have it.
Just a couple of points. I mean, inspirational scheme, no doubt about it, and the level of energy is also inspirational. Let me say, and it, as Mick Dunt said, it ticks a lot of the boxes, if not most of the boxes, if not all the boxes. I particularly like the box it ticks in relation to affordable housing. Frome desperately needs social housing for rent, not affordable, social housing for rent. I would like to ask, and maybe this is too much detail, perhaps you can provide it at a later stage, the actual accommodation, what that will consist of, because we desperately need one-bedroom properties. We desperately need properties for older people to downsize into. So in terms of mixed use, it should also be mixed use in terms of residential use. That's crucial for the town, and just retaining the people that want to live here. So 500 people want to live in Frome. They're on the housing register now, if not more. The other question was more a statement, really. I do question the financial aspects of it in terms of what you were saying, Paul, about the compliance of the scheme. It is, I mean, your scheme is compliant. It would not be going to the planning board if it wasn't policy compliant, as was the Acorn scheme, and that was approved on 2 separate occasions, and we know why. So it's not an issue about compliance. The issue is more about Mendip changing their position. And I think politically, and I think, Paul, you were saying the political landscape has changed. Let's remember that next year there's now going to be elections for the new Somerset County. So the political landscape is changing, and the administration at Mendip maybe want to adjust their view. Far be it for me to suggest that they should. Who am I? I'm only a local councillor. But maybe they would wish to do that for political reasons. And lastly, my point is that we must remember, although this is about Frome, from Mendip's perspective, this is about Mendip and what it can bring for the Mendip population, not just about Frome. And that's where they come down to their financial profit rather than social profit, which is what I love about this scheme. Thank you.
Not sure I'm going to add much to the statements you made. In terms of the housing mix, I think the first thing you mentioned, yes, certainly there's a huge range of starter homes and smaller properties, as well as larger family properties as well. So there should be lots to offer older people that might want to downsize and still live in the town centre and be close to all the amenities that they want, and be in an area where there's also a primary school. You know, that's the kind of community mix that we'd want to engender in the site. Your points generally around Mendip, yeah, absolutely. We think the political dynamic is changing, the political landscape is changing, as you say, with the shift to the unitary authority. And I think I saw today that elections are now going to be in April 2022. May, sorry. So this is going to be a topic for those that are seeking elections. So what are some of the things that we might want to do? Well, I think we should go and speak to those people that are looking to be elected and make clear to them, you know, if this is on your leaflet that you're not, you know, behind this, that's going to be, why not? Yeah, why not? I'm not sure I'm going to vote for you.
Thanks, Paul. It is 7:30. I'm going to take 2 more questions. So is there any questions from the floor? Any more questions from the floor?
Super quick one.
One more question.
Sorry, super quick. I just wondered what thought you put into charging points. Sorry, I was wondering what thought you put into charging points in all the car parking areas.
So we're looking at a charging point, electric charging point for every car parking space.
So one more question at the back.
Hi, well done, guys, fantastic, blown me away. That's quite sure I've got my vote. One simple question, because I know you're used to it, working to deadlines. What's our deadline? How quickly do we have to convince Frome and the world to follow this route? Just going out, getting people to follow us in the town, flyers, whatever. What have we got to work to? You know, Have we got 6 months? Have we got a week? Have we got 10 years?
I'm gonna say it's urgent. So, and I do come back to, you know, the primary route that Frome can voice its perspective on this scheme and its support is through the formal planning process. So if there's someone you know in Frome who would be supportive of this scheme, it's talking to them, making them aware of it, because you're absolutely right. And it's beyond frustrating. I meet someone in town and they, Mayday, yeah, what's that thing again? You know, and so we've got to break past that point, and some of the stuff that we can organise through Chloe will help with that. It is getting those numbers of supportive comments up as high as we can, and then taking other action. And, you know, we need to be imaginative as Mayday, but everyone else does as well. Writing to the relevant district councillors, probably not these two, not necessary. And writing to, sorry?
I haven't made a decision.
Of course, no, I know that. And you know, writing to any political league, writing to Mendip District Council, writing to Roswike, you know, making your voice heard as much as possible, as quickly as possible. There's no doubt, because there is no fixed point in this. You know, consent has still not been granted for AECOM to start work, and while that is the case, the door is open. And if they do go on consent, that doesn't mean it's over. I hasten to add that, but now is the time to act, definitely.
Thanks, Paul. We're going to take one more question online.
A nice, easy last question for you. Could the Lido be a natural swimming pond?
John, do you want to answer that?
Yes, yeah, yes.
That's a good answer.
Yes.
Are you sure?
Great. Thank you. I think that's it for tonight. It's at 8:30. We've just gone a bit over, but I think some really interesting questions and answers. For those online and for those in the room, a copy of this will be made available on the Frome Town Council YouTube channel.
It will be recorded.
Right. And as Jay mentioned earlier, if there's any questions that haven't been answered, we will make sure they're passed to the Mayday Saxonvale team, and I'm sure they'll answer them. And same with anyone in the room here that didn't get a chance to answer a question, I apologise. But please send your questions through, and I'm sure the team, the Mayday Saxonvale team, will answer. Apart from that, it's thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And thanks to everybody for turning out, and everybody online for joining us. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.